So before I read his profile, I need to reinforce this. You need to join the conversation online, because I know that when he starts talking, you would have so much to write and to shout about on social media. And you can do that by joining the conversations on X, on Instagram, Facebook, using the hashtag #ThePlatformNG and #ThePlatform36. The Platform NG and the Platform 36. So as you are listening, please ensure that more people are hearing what you're listening to as well. Mr. Olusegun Adeniyi is a journalist, writer, and former presidential spokesman. He is a fellow of the Nigerian Academy of Letters and a fellow of the Nigeria Institute of International Affairs. Author of several books, including The Last 100 Days of Abacha, Adeniyi has also participated in several professional and academic programs in many countries. In April 2019, Adeniyi was inaugurated, along with others from 29 countries, as a council member of the Belt and Road News Network in Beijing, China. In July 2007, he attended the International Visitor Leadership Program organized by U.S. State Department in Washington. He also spent the 2010-2011 academic session as a fellow at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs, Harvard University, where he conducted his research on the factors that shape incumbent presidential elections in Africa. Adeniyi is currently the chairman of ThisDay Editorial Board. Please make welcome once again to the platform, Mr. Olusegun Adeniyi. We can do better. We can be more generous with our applause.
You know, when Pastor Koji saw me this morning, he said, "Why are you wearing a suit?" And actually, it's because I made a terrible mistake. You know, when I was preparing for platform this year, I said, this year, I'm going to come here and I'm going to be serious. So I'm not going to tell all those cow tales and all that. Because right now, even if you use the new minimum wage being proposed, 1 year's salary cannot buy you a cow. So I decided that I'm not going to tell any cow story. That I will just come and I will deliver my something. And I came yesterday, and my brother Yomi came to see me and said, we're expecting those your cow stories. And everybody I've been meeting, I've been saying, we are expecting your stories. And it just dawned on me that I should have stuck to what worked. I should have just prepared a story. And what I took from that is that I'm not as smart as I thought I am. And it reminds me of a man who went to a barbing salon. He was there at the salon. He saw one cute little boy. And he was just interested in the boy. And the barber saw his interest, and he asked him, forget that boy. He's the dumbest boy I've ever seen. And the guy was curious. So he whispered, he said, I will demonstrate to you. So the man brought out 2 notes, 1,000 naira and 500 naira. So he told the boy, pick the highest denomination. And the boy picked 500 naira and ran out. So after he left, he said, I told you, that boy is very dumb. I've done that dozens of times. And it's the same thing. He never learns. The man was surprised because the boy looked smart to him. But he thought, well, he couldn't argue with the evidence anyway. Maybe the guy just does not know figures. So he left. He finished his barbing, and as he was going, he saw the boy at a corner shop where they were selling ice cream. And he met the boy. He said, look, the man showed you 500 naira and 1,000 naira. Don't you know that 1,000 naira is bigger than 500 naira? The boy said, I know. Then why did you pick 1,000 naira? The boy put his ice cream in his mouth with a mischievous twig. He said, the day I do that, the game is over. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be here this morning. One phrase some people will say fast that has been popularized by politicians the last 25 years is that of democracy dividends. But whatever it means, it is evident that most Nigerians have not been availed of their fair share. For all its human and material resources, Nigeria's GDP is still among the lowest in the world. Food inflation, which is currently about 40%, is not only frightening, but also breeds the risk of social, economic, and security turbulence. So while periodic elections are good, if because of the choices we make, most of our citizens still find it difficult to put food on their table, there's a problem. In any case, a country's democratic election is as good as the country itself. From the United States to Europe and Asia, the rise of Donald Trump and fellow travelers has led to the consensus that liberal democracy is under threat. But the real challenge in Nigeria and most other African countries is existential, as people worry about where their next meal will come from. In Abuja a few weeks ago, to speak at a program organized by the Sehu Musa Yar'Adua Center, Afrobarometer co-founder, Professor Gia Buhadi, said that in survey after survey, people on the continent have been consistent in their pro-democratic aspirations. But he also warned that lack of accountable governance relative to citizens' expectations is driving many to lose faith in democracy. I quote him, "Policy actors and advocates must focus on accountable governance in order to sustain and deepen citizens' faith in democracy," he admonished. In his 2022 piece, Democracy on a Ventilator, Andrew Sheng, a former chair of the Hong Kong Securities and Futures Commission, argued that electoral promises are meaningless if there are no deliverables in an accountable manner. In the case of Nigeria, a democracy that can neither advance the welfare of the people nor protect them from dying cheaply and needlessly in the hands of a cocktail of violent vagrants is endangered. This morning, I am borrowing from my comic book on 25 defining issues that have defined the last 25 years of our current democratic journey. I started the book early last year, but despite my best efforts, it's still in the works. Hopefully, it should be ready by December. I'm looking at the salient issues that have defined the past 25 years, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm also exploring potential pathways for addressing some of them with a view to strengthening our democracy. One of the issues interrogated in the book is the futility of godfatherism. That should be no surprise. It is an issue I believe we need to deal with if our democracy is to deliver the public good. The title of my presentation this morning is Democracy on Ventilator, the Role of Godfathers. Godfatherism comes in different variants. The common variant today is that by outgoing political office holders foisting on the people their handpicked successors. There are, of course, other variants, but there is no substantial difference between the power merchants of old, who sought no offices themselves, and the current ones who seek to plant surrogates after their terms. Stripped of all pretensions, godfatherism is about the pursuit of private interest at public expense, and it is not about the good of the people, as we have seen over the years in our country. Effective state capacity ensures that institutions function optimally, but we cannot develop such capacity if all we have to offer is godfatherism, which hinders genuine democratic representation. Meanwhile, a ventilator is a life support machine that provides oxygen to the lungs for those who can no longer breathe on their own. During the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, it was a life or death situation for many who were placed on a ventilator. That precisely is where we are with our democracy in Nigeria today. It may be important to state here that godfatherism is not peculiar to Nigeria. It is a global challenge, though in varying degrees. The Philippines has a history of political dynasties and godfathers. Powerful families control local politics, perpetuating their influence across generations. Italian politics has also seen its fair share of godfathers, especially in regions like Sicily, where the influence of mafia families in elections has been well documented. The politics of Kenya is also replete with influential figures who shape electoral outcomes. These kingpins control party nominations and funding. The consequences, of course, include compromised governance and limited accountability. In 2007, the Human Rights Watch, an international non-governmental organization headquartered in New York, did an in-depth report titled Corruption, Godfatherism, and the Funding of Political Violence, with a focus on Nigeria. I quote, "These godfathers are not mere financiers or political campaigns. Rather, they are individuals whose power stems not just from wealth, but from their ability to deploy violence and corruption to manipulate national, state, or local political systems in support of the politicians they sponsor. In return, they demand a substantial degree of control over the governments they help bring into being, not to shape government policy, but to exact direct financial returns." In my coming book, the chapter on godfatherism is detailed, and I'm exploring the different variants. We can see them on full display even today. There are many examples to cite, from Port Harcourt to Kano. But this morning, I want to illustrate my point with just one variant of godfatherism, from which I draw two examples, one in Oyo State and the second in Anambra State. I have deliberately chosen this variant and the two case studies because we live in a country where collective amnesia has become a common disease. Besides, in the two instances, critical institutions like the legislature and judiciary that should ordinarily serve as bulwarks of democracy became willing tools in the hands of godfatherism to the detriment of the people. Let's start with Oyo State. In 2003, Rashid Ladoja of the PDP defeated then incumbent governor, the late Lam Adesina, who contested on the platform of the Alliance for Democracy. But Ladoja relied heavily on the instrumentality of the late Alhaji Lamidi Adedibu. It didn't take long before things fell apart between the two of them. Adedibu, of course, means no word about his grasp with the former, whom he claimed was collecting 65 million naira as security vote every month. And I'm quoting Adedibu, without giving him, Adedibu, what is considered his fair share. And now this is what Adedibu said. You know that governors don't account for security votes. He, Ladoja, was to give me 15 million naira of that every month. He reneged. Later, it was reduced to 10 million naira, yet he still did not give me. Since Adedibu was not a politician to slide without consequences, what followed was predictable. On 12 January 2006 in Ibadan, 18 of the 32 members of the Oyo State House of Assembly sat in a hotel room and pronounced that the governor had been impeached. This was despite a case filed in court by 3 members of the same house who argued, and quite correctly, that the pro-impeachment members did not have the requisite numbers. With federal might on their side, Ladoja's deputy, the late Alao Akala, was immediately sworn in as Oyo State governor. Although Ladoja challenged the impeachment in court, it took 10 months before he could regain his seat. On November 1, 2006, the appeal court sitting in Ibadan, presided by Justice J.O. Ogebe, threw out the purported impeachment. The court held that it violated Section 188 of the 1999 Constitution, which contains the correct processes for impeaching a governor. After regaining his seat, Ladoja provided insights on the nature of relationship with Adedibu and the various manifestations of godfatherism. Here is what Adedibu said. 1, Adedibu asked me, do you know how to abuse people? And I said no. Then he asked, can you take away your clothes in public and fight? I said no. Thirdly, he asked, can you tell lies against somebody and swear on the Quran and again call witnesses? Again, I said impossible. Then he said, those are the things we always use in politics. Ladoja, of course, refused to speak on the financial agreement he may have had with his then godfather. But his special advisor on security and protocol, Bola Alfonso, inadvertently corroborated Adedibu's claim. Let's put the record straight. I am a living witness to the promise that a certain amount of money will be given Adedibu every month. If any arrangement had been agreed upon, I want to say it would have just been a token, said Alfonso. Because I am sure local government chairman will go there to pay their dues. There is no way commissioners will not go there. There is no special advisor who will not go to him. And even, I am sure civil servants will be going underneath to see Baba. Because he intrigued me, I visited Adedibu a couple of times at his Malete Ibadan residence. And I wrote a couple of columns on him while he was still alive. But Adedibu himself once provided insights on the reward of a godfather. In a 1992 interview with African Concord magazine, Adedibu was asked about the expectation of a godfather. And here is what he said. Let me put it this way. Imagine you lead 5 of your boys for an assignment and you are given 50 naira after you had supervised them to work. You, as the leader, if you are wise, will give each of your boys 10 naira, at the end of which you will be left with nothing. You now tell them to give you whatever pleases them. At the very least, each will give you 2 naira. That gives you 10 naira, while they will each will be left with 8 naira. Meanwhile, they will still be grateful to you. That is the reward of a kingmaker. The implication here is that the godfather is not promoting candidates based on platforms, issues, or programs, while concerns about the welfare of the people have nothing to do with what is clearly a mercantile arrangement. By Adedibu's logic also, the kingmaker is supposed to eat more than the king. This arrangement is a recipe for trouble, as we have seen in several theaters across the country in the past 25 years. 2 decades ago, we saw that in the Chris Ngige Chris Uba Broglo in Anambra State, which led to massive destruction that in turn made the late Professor Chinua Achebe to reject the national honor conferred on him by President Olusegun Adeniyi. The story can be traced back to 1999, when the late Dr. Chinwoke Mbadinuju became the first governor of Anambra State under the current dispensation. 4 years later, Mbadinuju could not gain a second-term ticket from the PDP, following his inability to keep faith with the agreement he allegedly entered with his godfather, Chief Chris Uba. Instead, Uba adopted Dr. Chris Ngige, for whom he deployed his political machine, both at the PDP primaries and the 2003 election. A few days after Ngige was sworn in, Uba boasted about his power. And this is what he said. It is not just the governor and his deputy that I sponsored. There are also 3 senators, 10 members of the House of Representatives, and 30 members of the House of Assembly. I sponsored them. And for emphasis, he said, this is the first time in the history of Anambra State that one single individual will be putting every public official in the state in power. Less than 2 months in office, Ngige, a city governor, was abducted from government house and moved to a hideout in a made-for-Nollywood drama of infamy that demonstrated the level of decadence in our politics. By Ngige's account, the bone of contention was the demand of 3 billion naira by Chris Uba for his alleged campaign expenses on my behalf, which I turned down. Yet, it was not as if the governor completely shunned his godfather. As Ngige explained at the time, he had already compelled the state accountant general to pay Chief Chris Ubah 960 million naira upfront to defray the cost of a contract awarded in 1996 during the military era. But that was apparently not enough for his godfather. On 10 July 2003, at the State House of Assembly, then Speaker Mrs. Victoria Sodo read a letter purportedly written by the governor that Ngige had resigned from office on personal grounds. Within minutes, the House of Assembly accepted this resignation and directed the Chief Judge of the state to swear in the Deputy Governor, Okeude, as the new governor. Immediately after the House proceedings, a contingent of policemen arrived at the government house in 3 trucks and whisked away Ngige, who was later cited at his temporary residence at Choice Hotel in Oka, the state capital. Shortly after, Ude addressed the state, claiming to have assumed office to avoid a vacuum and in allegiance to the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. But all over Nigeria, it was evident that a shoddy drama was playing out in the state. While the whereabouts of the governor could not be ascertained, his special assistant on media and publicity, Fred Chukwulobe, announced that Ngige had not resigned. He said, the governor, Dr. Ngige, has not resigned. The letter purportedly written to the lawmakers is false and not written by him. Dr. Ngige is still the executive governor of Anambra State. Meanwhile, at the hotel where he had been taken, something fortuitous happened to change the course of events. A traditional ruler, Igwe Anugu of Mboku, was passing by when he heard the altercations between Ngige and the security agents who held him captive. The Igwe sought to know from the governor what was going on. I told him, this Ngige, I told him these people said I have resigned when I have not resigned. Apparently shocked, the royal father reportedly said, but we heard on the radio that we have resigned. When Ngige narrated the story, the Igwe made a call to the Second Republic Vice President, the late Dr. Alex Ikweme, and handed his mobile phone to Ngige. That elicited another drama. The security agents attempted to snatch the phone from Ngige. The traditional ruler brought out a pistol. The call with Ikweme did not yield much result. Assisted by the traditional ruler, Ngige made another call, this time to the PDP National Secretary, the late Chief Vincent Ogbulafo. Fortunately for Ngige, Ogbulafo was with the other PDP National Working Committee members at the time. They were all concerned about developments in Anambra State. Ngige shared his harrowing experience in the hands of his godfather. Ogbulafo put his phone on speaker mode so others could join in. The interesting conversation detailed in my coming book is quite revealing of the situation in Anambra State at the time, but a sampler from what Ngige told the NWC members that day. Here Ngige. For the past 2 weeks, Chris Ubah, who said he wanted to appoint all 11 commissioners, special advisors, ADC, chief detail, secretary to the state government, even rejected the appointment of our personal staff. He said they are not acceptable to him. I do not know why. I told him that I only appointed those we had agreed upon earlier. So I am surprised. Last week, he deployed a permanent secretary in my office without my approval. Before the conversation ended, Ngige pleaded with Ogbulafo and the listening NWC members, please keep in touch with me. You know I am not free as I am talking with you. After he regained freedom, Ngige decided to be his own man with public opinion on his side. In revenge, Ubah weaponized the Peter Obi case at the tribunal. His supporters testified in court on how they rigged the election. The case went as far as the Supreme Court, but Obi ultimately prevailed and Ngige lost out. The rest, as they say, is history. Now, what can we learn from the foregoing? Godfatherism will not be peculiar to Nigeria since it exists in various forms worldwide. But our experience in the last 25 years should serve as a cautionary tale, urging us to critically examine power dynamics in politics and seek more inclusive alternatives. As we have seen with the primaries of the major political parties, godfatherism restricts the emergence of credible candidates who can genuinely serve the public. It has also enthroned people who have no business in governance. This is why every hand must be on deck to put a stop to the politics of manipulation and imposition that godfatherism fosters. No matter how we look at it, godfatherism stifles democratic goals. When elected officials owe their political success to godfathers, it is no surprise that they get entangled in a constant tug of war between serving the public interest and appeasing their godfathers. This compromises policy decisions, allocation of resources, and the appointment of key officials, all done with the implicit approval of the godfather. If our democracy is to survive and thrive, the task before the present crop of political leaders is to mobilize and collectively fight poverty, ignorance, and underdevelopment. That cannot be done in a milieu where some people invest in politics, not in promotion of the public good, but as a transactional enterprise for which they must reap bountifully and possibly secure the future. Can I take 3 more minutes and I'll be done? The ultimate test of the value of a political system, as Lee Kuan Yew, the founding father of modern Singapore, reminded us, is whether it helps to improve the standard of living for the majority of its people. It is perhaps for that reason that Nigerians have settled for democracy with the belief that they will be better governed and enjoy shared prosperity. Unfortunately, it has not worked that way. With the wave of disenchantment fueled largely by the harsh socio-economic environment that has been compounded by general insecurity, it is important for the authorities at all levels to feel the pulse of the people. As stated earlier, my comic book is not all gloom and doom. It highlights some of the major strides of the last 25 years. But I believe we should not be in denial about some of the issues we may also need to deal with so that our democracy can survive and thrive. Godfatherism is distorting our democracy by limiting the choice of the electorate to favored candidates, allows some people to use the resources of the state to sponsor surrogates, and advancing the preference and interests of the incumbent over and above those of the majority. To change the narrative, political parties have a role to play. Their leadership selection processes must be freer, fairer, and less transactional. Let me now conclude with this story about a traveler who visited a Greek monastery that was perched high on a steep mountain. And the only way to reach the monastery was in a rope basket. With a sense of adventure, the traveler got into the basket. But just as he was about to be taken up the steep cliff, he noticed that the rope lifting the basket was frayed. He asked the monk, "How often do you replace the rope?" Apparently taken aback by the question, the monk responded, "Every time it breaks." Unfortunately, that has been our attitude to democracy in Nigeria. I listened to President Bola Tinubu's democracy speech this morning. He delivered a very powerful message. I like this particular line. The real test of our democracy is whether we shall lower our guards as the shadow of despotism and its evident physical danger fade. That is a very important point, although it must also be noted that lowering the guards can manifest in so many ways. Our first democratic experiment lasted just 6 years. The second attempt was even shorter, 4 years and 3 months. Meanwhile, the third attempt was stillborn. While it is remarkable that the current democratic dispensation in our country has lasted a quarter of a century, we should not wait for the rope to break. I agree with the president that despite all the challenges of recent years, we have kept the military at bay and offer some windows of freedom of expression and other civil liberties. But in the interest of our country, we must find ways to balance political patronage with genuine representation. The only enduring legacy in a democracy is meeting the needs and aspirations of the people, not just that of a privileged few. While it is understandable that those who work must eat, the long-term benefits of building strong institutions far outweigh short-term individual interests. When institutions function effectively, they facilitate investment, innovation, and productivity that benefit all. Conversely, weak or corrupt institutions hinder economic progress. To secure our democracy, all the critical stakeholders must begin to think beyond themselves by placing the people and their welfare as top priority. Thank you very much.